Welcome to Thursday's episode of the 905 Roundup with me, Roland Tanner.
I am Joel McLeod.
And we're back for another week looking at some stories from around the 905 region. And we're going to start off just following up on our Tuesday episode with Scott Wallace of Burlington Taxi, because just a really interesting story. And we both felt that our interview with Scott threw some extra light onto things that it's worth exploring and discussing beyond just a conversation with Scott. So, Joel, what were your thoughts? My
thoughts on that entire conversation with Scott was it changed the narrative around this story, and it turned into a bit of a borderline scandal at City Hall. If you haven't listened to the interview, folks, definitely go back, listen to the whole thing, because Scott dropped, I thought it was a bombshell of a piece that changed the narrative that we were told for a number of days by mayor and other councillors and the other councillors at City Hall that 2018 there was an order in council. Directive to the city staff, go review the city bylaws pertaining to taxi services, and that for some strange, odd reason that never materialized. Either nobody did the report or nobody handed the report to city council. It just poof vanished into the ether somewhere on Branch Street. What Scott's told us was that he was actually in contact between 2018 and 2020 with city staff requesting, follow up on that directive and to push that matter forward. To which he repeatedly blamed himself for not pushing hard enough to get a resolution to that regard. And I thought, okay, so if he's been in touch with city staff, we asked him, he didn't divulge which staff he was in touch with, but if he's calling city staff to say, okay, let's get down to this, let's do the work, review and report back to city council. And, the question goes, what happened? In that case, there was a willful decision to not do this. And that decision, this decision, either we're not going to do it, or we're going to deprioritize this to put it down on the bottom of the pile, so to speak.
Well, it certainly that thing. I think when we first spoke about this last week, it's like, was this just a mess up and someone forgot? And I think our initial kind of feeling was, forgetting doesn't happen quite the way. Sometimes people work at forgetting.
Right.
And it's like what Scott said. He, maybe on average he was in contact with someone at City Hall every 3 months since 2018. Well, that's pretty regular for most people to have any contact in City Hall. So there's no forgetting going on. Now, I think, I've had conversations with multiple people and multiple sources on this with some knowledge of what goes on at City Hall. And they were both talking about different things than what I'm going to be talking about here. But the strong implication, and I think I can say that quite confidently, is from both these people quite independently with very different backgrounds, very different perspectives, is that there was a negative feeling amongst some City Hall staff towards Burlington Taxi and maybe specifically towards Mr. Wallace. Now, that's by the way, I myself have said some negative things about Burlington Taxi over the years. In fact, my initial reaction when the news came out, was not very positive, because I never used Burlington Taxi, and once or twice I did use them, I did not have a very good experience. However, that is irrelevant to this situation. We're talking about a directive of council to staff that staff did not act on. That goes to the core of kind of how our municipal government works, that those directives have to be followed, because in terms of independent power of councillors to pursue any kind of agenda whatsoever, that's the only tool they have. In every other regard, councillors can only react to what is put in front of them by staff. Staff directives are the things where they can say, okay, we want this to happen, and we don't care that staff don't want it to happen. We're telling you, go and do it. Well, it's a limited tool, but it's the only tool they've got.
Well, look at it in perspective. Whether or not you enjoyed using Burlington Taxi or not, Burlington Taxi was a huge employer in the city. Scott himself said he had 200 some odd cars in his fleet. That's 200 drivers out on the roads. Not to mention the support staff that would be required to maintain that fleet, to the account, the accountancy and all the stuff that went on behind the scenes to keep the operation going. They're a major employer, not to mention as well a major service provider. The families and those who are of low income means and those on a fixed income, seniors especially, who are dependent on Burlington Taxi to shuttle them around the city to go about their lives. They were a major player. To just say, I think the guy's a jerk, I don't want to deal with him. You do not have the luxury to make that call. Unless you're a democratically elected councillor who can be held to account every 4 years. We were talking about this before we hit record. What gets me with this whole situation is we have a major Burlington company, a major player in the community, a fixture in the community, tells us, has been screaming for weeks, I'm going to be closing my doors if we can't fix this. I need you to fix this. And we find out that they've been pissing around for 3 years. They don't fix it. They shuffle it. Again, they do what they do best, shuffle it off. He ends up closing his doors for good. They go to business overnight, and there's no outrage at city staff for this. I've yet to see one councillor come out publicly and denounce city staff, say, you guys, and this is, kids, shut your ears. City staff, you fucked up royally here. Like, if 200 people are out of work. Seniors and families are now unable to rely on Burlington Taxi for their services. Somebody should be held to account as city staff. We've heard from Scott. He said, I need them to change the bylaws so I can adjust my model so I can keep operating. And instead, they shuffled it off down the road. And the question is, and
the bylaw was changed a week after Burlington Taxi closed down.
Right.
So now the bylaw, it's not entirely true, having read the bylaw, to say that the bylaw that's passed has done everything that Scott was asking for. However, the effect, at least in the interim term, is that Hamilton's Blue Line Taxi have got what Scott was asking for. So there's a kind of fine distinction there. I just want to be as accurate as possible about the bylaw that's been passed. Doesn't specifically talk about driver ownership and things like that Scott was talking about, which were the things that he wanted. But what has happened in effect is that Burlington will now allow driver owners, drivers who own their own taxis, operators, that's the word I'm looking for, to operate in Burlington, whereas previously they wouldn't. And that's what. Now, there was an apology made at the council meeting, at the emergency council meeting, which passed that bylaw adjustment or that change. And the apology was from the city manager, Tim Camiso, and it was a fairly profuse apology from Tim Camiso to councillors. No apology was made to Burlington Taxi. No indication of any part in the closure of Burlington Taxi. And Scott isn't putting everything at their door. He said, the insurance rates, the inability to get drivers, were the things which ultimately have brought Burlington to a taxi to a close this year. However, the long-standing problem that Burlington Taxi was not able to move to a that phrase you just used, owner-operator model, where the drivers buy their own taxis, was a major factor in that was involved. So, but the city clearly is not going to take any culpability for that. I'm sure the lawyers wouldn't let them, whatever, but this is the way the world works, and it's disappointing. And a reaction to this kind of apology from Tim Camiso, the city manager, from councillors was actually quite a bit of our hardworking staff have sort of jumped into action, and this is, they're so wonderful. And it's like, well, they're only jumping into action because they screwed up.
They got caught. They got caught. Yeah. They got caught putting it off, and they literally, this is high school cramming 101. This is, oh shit, the big book report is due tomorrow. I got to put something on paper. I'll just bullshit my way through it, hand it in, and oh yeah, the teacher doesn't know the difference. They gave me a passing grade, and that's where was the indictment from city council to city staff to say how did you sleep on this for 3 years?
Well, and there was a acknowledgement that mistakes had happened and the staff directive was not implemented, but there was no explanation of why, how it happened, why it happened. There's talk about, well, there have been procedural changes. Well, what procedural changes? Could we learn, please, what the procedure was previously that went so wrong, clearly, and what the procedure is now that's going to be different? We'd like to know. Now, when I ran for council back in 2018, there were candidates who would name city staff individually and do really quite unpleasant things. And I would not get involved with personal attacks or on staff because they don't have the ability to reply. So I'm not going to call for any individual's resignation or anything. But ultimately, any employee in any place, and this in the public service, has to be accountable for their actions just like the rest of us do. Ultimately, if I'm in any job and I screw up royally, I'm going to be accountable. And if it's something that affects businesses in the city where I live, then I have to be accountable for that too. So we're not going to go after people or anything like that. But ultimately, when things go badly wrong and it can be identified that this was a staff responsibility that was not followed through on, and sure, councillors and the mayor have a role in that because they could have been much more on the ball about making sure that their own instructions were actually put into action. We have to say what's what here, and that is that something went very seriously wrong, and you can make all the assurances in the world that it won't happen again. It doesn't really mean anything until we understand what actually happened and what's changed that means it won't happen again.
The problem is, quite frankly, this whole thing reeks of let's get past this, because I don't think anyone on city council, the good or the bad or the in between, want people to remember this. They want this to be passed. Let's forget this and move on. City staff clearly want it to be moved on because they know they fucked up. Like in the private world, this would be a fireable offense. This is the equivalent of the board of directors of a company saying, I want to report on what needs to be done to make us more competitive or to make us more profitable, and losing out to a competitor in the free marketplace. Yeah, somebody is going to be fired over this in the private enterprise. This is public government, so that's not quite so simple. I'm going to throw it back to the city councilors, because I would argue, if you're legitimately outraged over this colossal failure of city staff, because I really don't know, like with 200 people out of work and a major business gone, I don't know how else to categorize it as a colossal failure in every regard from Burlington City staff. The question I would have is, why are you not calling some kind of inquiry to either ask a third-party investigator to come in and say, we need to find out what happened here? Because not only do you want to know what happened with this file, I would be wondering, what other files are you sitting on that you are not doing work on? What other staff directives are sitting on somebody's inbox that haven't been touched in the intervening 3 years? What exactly happens when we give you a staff directive? You
assume there's a list kept somewhere, and that a list would be very carefully curated and looked after to make sure that those.
What are the processes? If where do you does the city council say, Tim, can you give us an update on the last week's staff directive? What stage are we at on the process? Did you hand it off to the person, the department head? Do you have a team involved in looking? Whatever the case may be. You can't have this willful ignorance of, we'll just do better next time. With 200 people in a major business out of work now, and a lifeline in the city, poof, gone. I'd be wanting to say, not only do I want to know who was responsible for this, what exactly happened here. I'd be wanting to say, I want to know for a fact this isn't going to be happening again, because I want to go to the public and say, yeah, we got it. This is how this operates, which is going to mean, I think, a lot of changes at City Hall, because what it'll mean is more public scrutiny, more public inquiry, that anybody, once a directive of city council has been given to city staff, that anybody should be able to follow up with it and say, what's the status of this? Where are you on?
Council directives should be, they are a matter of public record anyway, because they're in the minutes of council.
Absolutely.
So those directives, but it shouldn't be down to us to go through the minutes for the last 20 years and look at every directive and see if it's been followed up on. It seems fairly low-tech kind of thing to have that on the website somewhere so that everybody can check. When was that directive made? When was it meant to come back to council? Did it come back on the date they said it was going to come back? 3 months? Or did it come back
3 years
almost
later?
4 years later? Yeah.
Right. And if so, what was the reason why?
Yeah, and I just want to address a couple of other quick points as well, because depending on people's perspectives on Burlington Council, which tends to polarize in one of two ways, people try to make their excuses or their explanations according to their pre-existing prejudices, I tend to think. So one point was someone suggested to me, well, there's been an awful lot of staff changes at City Hall since 2018, and a lot of people quit. The old city manager was let go, immediately days after the last election. That kind of transition period, that kind of institutional memory, got screwed up because staff didn't like the mayor. Well, A, that's not really actually an excuse. B, we know for a fact that that's not true because Mr. Wallace has been going backwards and forwards to City Hall every 3 months since then to say, hey, where's my bylaw update? So that doesn't hold any water. The second point is that that technical point that the decision of an old council cannot bind those of a new council. So, everything kind of dies. It's like when Parliament, at the end of Parliament comes, that any legislation that's 3/4 of the way through just gets cancelled. It's the same kind of principle. And that's true. And what should happen in the transition to a new council is that although staff directives are on a big long list and you go through them, and actually the city clerk describes this kind of process for what happens after the next municipal election. You go through the list, like, okay, do we like all these? And then we'll carry those forward. And if we don't like some, then the council has the ability to say, okay, don't put that one back on the list. We don't like it. But none of that seems to have happened here. There's certainly no formal or open process that took place. So that doesn't really get anybody off the hook either. I don't think that it's not unusual for city managers to
the fact is
to change. Maybe not usually immediately after an election. But.
The excuses that were given don't hold mustard. They wouldn't hold mustard, I think, in high school. They certainly wouldn't hold mustard in the boardroom of a major company, and they shouldn't hold mustard in city council chambers. This reeks of people just trying to we either A, don't want to face up to our own incompetence on this file, or something possibly more nefarious took place. There's more willful action took place in this. I don't know what, but it's clear people just don't want to deal with this anymore. I suspect it's more of an embarrassment factor, the fact that nobody's going to look good on this.
And I think there's a culture between city staff and council that is always a bit of a delicate dance. Mm-hmm. And they try to get around that by being very respectful of each other. So, when staff makes a boo-boo and the city manager makes an apology, the council immediately goes into kind of, oh, don't worry about it, it's fine, our hardworking staff are so wonderful. And I think that's almost like a reflex reaction to an extent, and maybe because they've also been given private assurances that, okay, this won't happen again, and they know a lot more details than they're letting on. However...
This isn't a private situation. This is the public. This is our tax dollars at work. And
a company no longer exists that is a very important company in the city. And I don't think it's good enough to just brush that under the carpet. It is a big deal. And fine, there's more to it than just the city's role in this. And we're not pretending that isn't the case. However, whenever a directive of council to staff is ignored, that's a big deal. Ipso facto, big deal. Mm-hmm. Because that's how democracy works at municipal level. We need more.
All right. We'll take a break for now, and we'll come back with next story on the 905 Roundup. And we're back. So Next story up, we're taking a look at, again, more politics, because why not? It's the end of the year. But we're stepping away from Burlington City Council, and we want to take a look at, the province, because things aren't looking too good for the Liberals or the NDP as we head into next election year. Do they, Roland?
Yeah. I mean, I saw a reference on Twitter today to a poll, and I thought it was kind of interesting, the numbers that were being mentioned, and I went looking for the poll and couldn't find it. But I eventually tracked it down, and it's part of polling that was done by a company called Innovative Research, or just one of the polling companies in Ontario, as part of a report on energy and public opinion that they gave on December the 8th. And within that is kind of some what we would understand as just general political polling on, who would you vote for if there's an election tomorrow and stuff like that. And yeah, I mean, we've talked so often about the things that this provincial government are doing that seem so somewhere between incompetent and outright malicious so often, and yet. As of today, 33% of people think Doug Ford would make the best Premier of Ontario, versus 20% for Andrea Horvath and 11% for Stephen Del Duca. I mean, it's like, seriously, you guys can't even make better headway than that against a government which has had so many things that would seem, to warrant all kinds of unpopularity. In terms of actually, if an election was held tomorrow, who would you vote for? The PCs are ahead in that as well, 31% to 29%. Now, just like the federal election, in a sane world, we'd call it a dead heat between three parties, but that's not how we look at our politics in this country. So 31% for the PCs and 29% for the Liberals and 24% for the NDP is considered a win for the PCs.
Well,
it's bad. I mean,
what got me is on there's the undecided I don't know marker, 23%. It's actually in second place compared to which leader would make the best Premier of Ontario. The I don't knows is running in second place with Doug Ford, which is it's shocking to me that just the fact that the Liberals have not been able to make an impact. You're right, with all the goof ups and the blundering that the Doug Ford Conservatives have done. Because I'll be honest, I've not seen anyone who says, "Hey, they've just done a bang up job. They've done the best that they could." They stumble and they fumble over everything, and yet somehow he still has this folksy charm that just wins. That people say, "Oh, what else can you do?" And I think part of the problem is the NDP and the Liberals are basically handing it to them in every step of the way.
They're both supremely unimpressive at the moment. I have to say, and God knows. I mean, I think our political perspective is fairly clear. I mean, it's not aligned to any party, but it is progressive. But I would say this also, that the provincial politics in Ontario, no one pays attention until the writ drops. So it's a long-standing issue. We used to talk, when we were volunteers and things, there was people, why aren't we doing better at communication? It's because you can do all the communication in the world. No one's going to read it until the writ drops. Like, no one is interested. I get however many scores of press releases coming from all the parties who will send press releases. Do you want to guess which one doesn't? Saying, whatever they're trying to push this week. But frankly, it doesn't interest me a whole lot because it's party talking points, and it doesn't really tell me very much most of the time. So I do appreciate that it's very difficult, especially if you're a new leader, especially if you don't even have a seat in the House, to get noticed, to get any kind of headway, especially if you're the third party. Mm-hmm. However, everything seems to point towards the Liberals being the likely second choice, or the likely... They're going to be up there with the NDP. I mean, I'm not saying the NDP are not going to come out of this strongly, anything can happen. That's for sure in Ontario politics. Well, in fact, Canadian politics generally.
I'm looking at the poll here, and the Liberal brand is relatively strong, but in the last, according to the last few months, the Tories have overtaken them again. I think part of it is that nobody's putting forward a good narrative of how we're going to deal with COVID. I still think it comes back to COVID. I really do. I think that this pandemic is reshaping our society constantly. And we're still, everybody remembers when we're going to release all the restrictions for COVID next year. And by March of next year, we're going to go right back to how everything is hunky-dory, everything is fine. And Omicron comes, and all of a sudden, we're talking about going back into March of 2020. We're going straight back into full-on lockdown. I hope it doesn't come to that, but who knows? I mean, that's the talk that's out there. Let's face it, we are not going back to the before times. We need to change the way this province operates and our country operates if we're going to deal with these waves as they're going to come. The Liberals just aren't out there making this case. I think it would be helpful if Stephen Del Duca was in the legislature and he was able to get some playtime. I don't see him that often out in the world. Doug Ford makes the bad call, and of course they get Del Duca or Horvath comes out and say, yeah, that's a bad call. But that's what always happens. Nobody puts forward a narrative of this is what needs to happen.
We need to, surely by now, we're starting to get a sense of how to take on the Trump syndrome politicians. Mm-hmm. So, Rob Ford was really the first of that breed of politician, the I'm useless and I know it, but at least I'm different kind of politician.
Right.
And if nothing else, it comes back to that point. If nothing else, does that not prove to us that there is an appetite for politicians who are different? And then you're going to put up Del Duca against that, and then you're going to put up Andrea Horvath, who's on is this a fourth general election she'll be taking a tilt at?
Yeah,
who's really never managed to break through, even has stolen defeat from the jaws of victory once or twice in terms of where she's positioned the NDP vis-a-vis the Liberals. It's.
I think the thing that we're thinking,
you need big ideas to go up against big idiots.
I need a plan to follow through with it, and I think part of the problem is but all three parties are relying on the playbook from the mid 1990s. They're still relying on the Jean Chrétien the playbook of let's undersell and overperform, which worked in the 90s. It worked for Jean Chrétien beautifully. Good for him. He cracked it. I would argue though. That doesn't work. In the 90s and the early 2000s, things were very hunky-dory. Things were okay.
Wouldn't be seeing, I mean,
people are scared out of their minds. The family, I know for a fact, families are terrified of their kids getting COVID. They're terrified of schools shutting down again. They're terrified of being told we can't go see your friends and family anymore. And quite frankly, these fears are real. And I would argue in the last federal election, you don't really address it. People understand this thing is real. It's huge. It's bigger than all of us, and you need big ideas to tackle it. How are we going to address it? How are we going to make sure that if this comes back again, we have a system in place to deal with it? We're done with the let's fumble bum and let's come up with a new plan this week. It's no, I want somebody who's going to come up with a plan. We're going to revamp our social system so that we can deal with it so people aren't going to lose their homes. If we have to close down, we're going to make sure that the healthcare system can get needles into arms efficiently, quickly, and not make it a free-for-all. Like for some reason, we're still back at a free-for-all to get booster shots in this province. I don't know how this is happening, but it is. And yet, all we have is, well, let's just go and bitch and moan to the Liberals. And here's the thing. Everybody out there, and if you're a Liberal organizer or if you're an NDP organizer, I hope you listen to these next words very closely, because this is what's going on. And this is what everybody, I guarantee you, in the 905 in the province of Ontario was thinking. We're going to hear Andrea Horvath and Stephen Del Duca come out and complain about whatever thing Doug Ford does wrong. We know he's going to do something wrong. They're going to come out and they're going to complain and say, oh, he's doing it poorly. He needs to do better. Shame on him, blah, blah, blah. And then we're not hear about it. We won't hear anything until the writ drops. And then when the writ drops, we're going to hear these piecemeal, oh, we're going to give you a tax credit for football camp. We're going to give you a tax credit for dance lessons. We're going to give you, we're going to help give you a tax credit on windows and whatnot. And everyone's like, yeah, that's great. That's wonderful. Blah, blah, blah. I'm scared shitless of COVID. What are you going to do to make sure that when I go down to my family doctor, they've got a vaccine waiting to put my arm or into my kid's arm, or a booster shot for my relatives? How are you going to make sure that I can work from home and I don't have to worry about my boss calling me up at 3:00 in the afternoon and say, yeah, if you don't come in tomorrow, I'm firing you? Like,
where's the thing that we're going to take control of development in this province so that our cities are designed better, are built better, are dense and have the best architecture, but are still shaped in ways that are informed by the people who live in that city. How are we going to, rather than talking about minimum wages and whether it should be $16, $17, $18, $19, $20, whatever, how are we going to talk about abolishing minimum wages and making sure that everybody earns enough, and that there's more than a safety net, that poverty is eliminated, that people aren't lacking medicine, people aren't catching C. diff in hospital, getting an operation, and then being told that the medicine to treat that disease costs $3,000 because it's not covered by OHIP. What are the things that indicate a fundamental change on a scale of how we changed after the Second World War with the introduction
every elector in this country, in this province, in the 905 region knows in their gut the election is going to come and we're going to get down in trickles and baubles. We're not going to get an actual plan. We're not going to get a grand vision. We're not going to say, yeah, the old way didn't work. It left a lot of people behind and it didn't work. And we're done giving out tax credits for little trinkets and little things. When are we talking about greenifying our economy? Are we going to talk about actually, working to install more electric charging stations in publicly owned lands? Are we going to talk about actually getting electric cars on the roads, one way or the other? These things matter to people. This is what people are wanting to hear. They're wanting to see. They want big ideas. They're tired of, because quite frankly, it says you're cowardly or you don't get it. You don't get what my life needs. Things have changed so drastically in the last 2 years. You need to change your approach to politics. And just sit there.
I think people are crying. Yes, sorry, I just cut you off there, but
no, go ahead.
People are crying out for people who will tear up the rule book of 1990s politics, of that kind of, let's appeal to the most middle of the middle road because those guys will vote for us. And the people who want more radical reform, too bad, they'll vote for us anyway. Mm-hmm. That's not the way that's working. We have a completely fractured political scene, which ends up with a party that can't get more than 33% of the vote forming governments. But the rise of the Trumps and the Fords and the Johnsons is a symptom of this, because people look at those guys and go, well, you know what? He may be a buffoon and a moron, but at least he's different from these tame, boring, grey fools who aren't promising any significant change. And sure, most of us won't vote for the buffoons because we're looking for someone with actual vision, with actual ideas. But there's enough people who will go for the buffoon that the buffoon is the one you end up in government with.
Yeah. I mean, if you're listening and you happen to have Stephen Duca's ear or Andrea Horvath's ear, tell them go big. We need big ideas, because Lord knows we're not getting them from the conservatives these days.
Well, and if you want the evidence that this works, so take Trudeau's first election. So went into that election trailing in third place behind the NDP. Now, we know now that Trudeau is hardly a revolutionary. However, of the options on the table between, Mr. Grey, Stephen Harper, Mr. Brownish Grey, and Trudeau was the colourful character who seem to offer the best chance of significant change, of like a real change of direction. For people who generally aren't involved in politics, like, okay, this guy looks like he can bring something. And he won, against all logic in some ways. I mean, not against all logic, but I mean, he won. The colourful character won.
He won on his personality was bigger than everyone else on the stage, and that's why he won. I would argue he's been tarnished so badly that if Aaron O'Toole had a bolder vision,
Tom Mulcair. Oh my God!
There we go. But if Jagmeet Singh or Aaron O'Toole had kind of a bolder vision, something really earth-shattering, they probably would have won. They would have won past Justin Trudeau, because Justin Trudeau in the last election did not put forward a grand vision. It was very underwhelming. This provincial election, I'm sad to say, is shaping up to be more like the federal one. I'm yet to hear a grand post-COVID-19 vision of what an Ontario provincial society is going to look like. It's I hope I'm proved wrong. I'm hoping proved wrong. You know what? I'm going to say this much. Andrea or Stephen, if you're listening, come on next year to the 905er. It'll be election year. Come on, share us your ideas. Prove us wrong.
Prove us wrong. If we're idiots, like, we are delighted to have anybody on this show.
Oh my God, yes.
Idiots to our faces. It would be great.
It'll be cathartic for everybody.
Yeah. And I'm quite willing to admit that it's very likely true. So, we're just spouting off our opinions here, but, I do think that there's something to it. That, the age where playing it safe and playing it grey is over. There is a demand for something more. And my God, the NDP claim that they're that. I mean, so prove it. I'm not seeing it yet.
Well, you know what? We're coming up on our 40-minute mark, so I think we're going to have to wind up the episode there so people can get on with their days. But yeah, if you're like us and you're getting a little tired of the same old, share this episode around. Share it around around your friends. Share it on social media. I'd love to know if we're off base with everyone else, and maybe we're just two grumpy white guys in a basement just ticked off, or I suspect we're on the money on this one, that people want big, bold, and brave, and not just timid and trinkles and baubles.
More of the same.
Yeah.
Right now, you look at that. At the three, and with the greatest respect to Mike Schreiner and the Greens, actually, I think Mike Schreiner is probably deserves far more attention, just in terms of the efficiency of their organization, actually getting me onto their mailing list so that I can get the press releases from every party. The Greens take the biscuit, and they issue more press releases than any of the other parties. So those guys deserve all kinds of attention. So we're not ruling them out at all. But right now there are three parties who appear to be in the lead, and there's the usual three, and that's what we're dealing with. And it seems to be an election shaping up to be more of the same, and a more of the same election favors Doug Ford. It always, a more of the same kind of always favors the incumbent, because he's the same that we're going to have more of. It's like if you want to take it away from an incumbent who's only coming up for his second go round, you got to give people like a real reason to take it away from that person, because incumbency is not nothing. I ask Mike Harris.
All right, folks. Well, we'll leave it at that, and we'll talk with you next week with only 2 episodes left in the calendar year before we take a break for the holidays and talk in the new year. Thanks, everyone, and talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Bye.
That's it for this episode of the 905er. Thank you for listening. As always, you can send us your feedback, thoughts, and concerns, or ideas for future episodes to our email, info@905er.ca. We'd love to hear from you. You can help us keep the 905er going by financially supporting us through Patreon as well as PayPal. Visit us at 905er.ca and click on the support tab. As well, links are in the show notes for your convenience. Lastly, you can find us on social media. Search for _90fiber on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. So long for now. See you next time.
Looking to make the most out of this life and optimize your personal wellness? Then check out the Natural Man Podcast. Join me, host Mike C., as we explore all areas of human wellness, physical, mental, and emotional. Learn strategies to optimize your own well-being and be in the driver's seat of your own health. Remember, your doctor works for you. Learn biohacks, neurohacks, ways to improve sleep, and ways to optimize your body and your mind. Check us out on Apple, Spotify, the Fountain app, and at naturalmanpodcast.com.